I do believe that our attendees are in here, so I am going to hand it to you.
Welcome, folks. As Hannah said, this is your panel on Oh No, My Beloved Peasant Village. You're probably all veterans of virtual Balticon by now, but just in case we have folks who are joining for the first time, a few bits of housekeeping. My name is Mark Van Name, pronouns he, him. I'm the moderator for the panel. We are recording, so please be aware of that. At any time, feel free to type things into the chat window as if we could stop you, but definitely feel free to do that. And if you direct a short question to a panelist through that, they typically will just type the answer there. More generally, when you want a question for the whole panel to answer, type that into the Q&A window, which you can access versus the via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will typically save the questions till later in the panel. We'll have some discussion and then we'll get to the questions, but that doesn't mean something might not intrigue us and cause us to divert in the middle. That happens on panels. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll generally cycle through questions alphabetical order by last name. So Dan, would you like to start off introducing?
Hi, I'm Daniel M. Ford, Dan, he, him. I'm a fantasy and mystery novelist, originally from Baltimore, now in Newark, Delaware.
Melissa?
Hi, my name is Melissa Hayden, she, her, and I am a content editor at melissallhayden.com, and I also review books and share thoughts and insights on other book-related items at My World in Words and Pages, and I will put those links here in the chat. There you go.
Great. Beth?
I'm Beth Tanner. I write fantasy, science fiction, and horror. And my pronouns are she, her, and I live between Baltimore and DC.
Batya?
Hi all, I'm Batya Wittenberg. You may also know me as Batya the Toon. My pronouns are she, her. I am a filker and a fan fiction writer, and I'm in New York, Queens area.
And I'm Mark Van Name. I write novels. I've got 5 novels out so far from Bain, short stories, made my living as a tech journalist for a while, published about 1,500 articles there, and have published 60 or so essays on different topics. And I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I'm usually at Balticon. So the panel description refers to some cliche tropes: a loner riding into town on a dark and stormy night, the last survivor of a doomed expedition, a young person newly married into a family of dark secrets. I wanted to ask the panelists to briefly go through these. I think of them as story setups. What setups do you think have become cliche? Dan?
I think all of those mentioned, certainly, and the title, Oh No, My Beloved Peasant Village. And I'll admit, my first novel, almost the first scene, is a loner riding into a burned out peasant village. So I'm certainly not immune to them.
Melissa?
As I agree with Dan, most of those are as well. We also come up with the ones where there was something that happens that kills the family right off the bat, to get our character motivated to do whatever they need to do. That's another one that I felt has really been played. But again, it's all in how it's handled and written and the story around it that I think helps keep them going.
Beth?
Yeah, the killing off the entire family, or just the, oh no, the poor orphan setup, I think is, again, overdone, but can be done well. And then the party meets at the inn, which always reads to me like bad D&D fanfic.
Batya?
Well, I'm going to be contrarian here. I am not sure there's any such thing as a cliche as such. I think that there's tropes that are handled in a way that's interesting and tropes that are handled in a way that's boring, and it can be the exact same trope Sure, you can have the party meets at an inn in a way that is dull and is just like the beginning of dozens and dozens of D&D campaigns, or you can have the party meets at an inn in a way that's interesting. You can have the burned out peasant village that's dull. You can have the burned out peasant village that's interesting. It is the difference between a cliche and a trope and an archetype is purely subjective. Is my position.
I would agree with that, and we'll come back to that a bit. I would add to this list what I consider to be one of the archetypal SF and fantasy plots, but it's also outside our genre as well, and that is the every person gets thrown into an extraordinary situation and proves to have extraordinary abilities and saves the day, you know, from Harry Potter to just about anything that you encounter in fiction, and that's I think inevitably interesting to us because we all hope to be that person. So let's talk a little bit about why these things are so compelling, you know, and pick any one or two that you particularly like. Dan, you mentioned starting with the village. Why do these things have so much power with us?
I think that they have sort of instant stakes, right? You see a burned out peasant village. Who burned it down? Why? What were they seeking? What was their motive? If it's your standard fantasy, you know, medieval-ish European-oid peasant village, why would anybody want to burn that down? It's defenseless and it's poor, and so why would they do it? Was it a revenge thing? Was it an invading army? Was it a beast? Was it a monster? Was it a deliberate terror tactic? Like, there's lots of reasons why that could have happened. So, and I totally agree with what Batya said. It's good trope. It's handled well or it's handled badly. Right? Just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it can't work. I also think maybe we as writers come back to it because we're constantly told you have to hook the audience right away, right? You want to sell this story, you want to sell this novel, the audience better be in by page 5 or paragraph 5. And if they're not, forget it. So you want to start with something strong and dramatic right away. So what do? You look at the stock of these dramatic openings that have worked for decades.
Melissa?
I agree. You want to pull them in, but you also are giving your character a direction right off the bat. You know that if something happens, now we're going to find out. You don't want to just start with how pleasant everything is, because it's never pleasant. And we know that. That's why we're reading it.
Beth?
Yeah, I completely agree with that point, that it sets up a situation that we're all familiar with, a status quo, if you will, that excites us and is familiar enough, like the pseudo medieval village or whatever, that we can shorthand the description of that and get right to the plot. And it also sets up a character or characters who are, yes, immediately, you know, to use the Lester Dent formula, they're immediately in a world of hurt, and they're alone, and so they're going to have to survive by their wits or their cunning or their skill or whatever it is. They don't have a huge supporting cast yet to help them on the journey.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm absolutely going to agree with what Melissa said about the stakes. Is that, as a rule, happy and contented people don't have adventures. A happy and contented life, generally, with relatively few exceptions, isn't an interesting story. So if you start with somebody happy and contented, or at least, you know, not having anything particularly wrong in their lives, as a reader, you know something is going to go catastrophically wrong, or be shown to have been catastrophically wrong all along, and the character only just now becomes aware of it, because otherwise, where is the story? Now, you can, I think, theoretically make a story work without immediately things being catastrophically wrong, but it's much more difficult, and it takes longer, as Beth said, to hook the audience, and also as Daniel said. And also, this may lead into something else. One of the reasons I think that Trope's work is this was sort of already said, and I forget exactly by whom, the familiarity of it, the shorthand. That was Beth, yes, I thought so. There's shorthand. The reader recognizes something and says, ah, I know what's going on here. And readers and viewers, people hearing stories, like familiarity. They just don't like to be bored by it. And so this is something I know, but it's being presented a little bit differently. Is a good thing. It's not bad to give readers something they've seen before if you can still interest them. It helps to have familiarity.
Yeah, I think in general, people like to have plots that have rising stakes, that have forces that are powering the narrative more than what shall I have for lunch today, and the peril of confronting my refrigerator. And so I think that we are, as writers, drawn to telling those stories that have a narrative oomph behind them. So let's pick some works that do this well, going a little bit against the panel spirit from the narratives. But let's pick a few items that you think are particularly good books, movies, whatever narrative form you like, that take a trope and do a great job with it. Daniel?
I just saw somebody in the chat ask how many members of the Justice League are orphans. It's a lot of them. And as many times as we've seen Thomas and Martha Wayne be killed on screen or in comics, like, we keep doing it, and that story endures, and people love that character, right? People love that character. I think I keep coming to examples outside the genre, like how many of Dickens' characters were orphans? How many Dickens novels start with, someone finding someone dying, right? Or in Jane Eyre, it's not exactly marrying into a family of mysterious secrets, but it's pretty quickly moving into a house full of mysterious secrets, right? So those are the first examples that come to mind for me.
Cool. Melissa?
Am I still muted? No. There's goodness. We always come back to the orphan. I think Michael Sullivan started with one of his series. No, they were as an adult, but we didn't know who the parents were for one of the main characters. And that whole mystery with him, that kept it going, but that was a overall arc that grew as he did his adventures and stuff like that. We have always fallen for the people that have lost their families too. I mean, that pulls us in. We kind of feel bad for those people to keep everybody going. You want to root for that underdog.
Beth, what examples do you think do it well?
I'm going to go back in time slightly, but not as far back as Dan. And things like the Lloyd Alexander series, Turan Wanderer, Book of Three, I'm getting them all out of order, Black Cauldron. But those, I mean, he's an orphan and it's sad, but the rest of the adventure is excellent, and we don't dwell on the orphan part in a way that, again, I think it takes the setting trope, but then takes it in a different direction, to Batya's point, where it's familiar, so we can get into it right away, but then we go off in a completely different and lovely direction. And I still reread those books on the regular because they're lovely. Another one that I like, although it's not technically like the orphan trope, but it is sort of a setup trope, is the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Kids without their parents in a strange environment, which we see often, but then it goes in a completely, at the time, at least for me, different direction.
Batya.
And of course, the portal fantasy is now a trope of its own. And I think Narnia was one of the earliest, if not the earliest. No, Alice in Wonderland was earlier, but that's
another
the one
panel.
that came to mind as far as a book that takes tropes and does them well. This is a weird example, but it's the first one that came to mind, so I'm going with it. Is Stephen King's Dark Tower series, which I heartily recommend, although if you haven't read it, I recommend starting with the second book, and then if you feel like it, going back and reading the first book. It was one of the first things he ever wrote, and large parts of it are not very good, but the rest of the series. And the Dark Tower books combine Western movie tropes with high fantasy tropes in a way that shouldn't work but does. And I think part of what makes those books so appealing to me, at least, is that unexpected juxtaposition. Sure, you know about the high fantasy trope of the wandering knight who's finding wrongs and putting them right. Sure, you know the Western trope of the village that's being raided by it's being periodically. It's basically the Magnificent Seven. And sure, you know about the science fiction trope of terrifying destructo robots, but you put all of those in the same place and you've got something completely new and at the same time tremendously familiar. And also, I think another thing that makes it work is there are characters in this series who, because they are from what was the modern day when he was writing it, from the 80s, they're familiar with all of these tropes. They've seen these movies. They've read these books. They're like, oh, I know what this is. I know where we are. And the character gets to be a little bit genre savvy. And I'm always fond of that sort of thing.
Can I chime in on something on that really quickly, Mark?
Sure.
Well, you brought up that particular, there's a whole set of those sort of Japanese takes on Westerns and Western takes on Japanese movies and stuff that I think are also playing on that known trope, flip it, known trope, flip it. And giving the reader or the viewer a chance to kind of go, I see what you're doing. That was it.
Yeah, I think we have all sorts of great works that do this well. You know, the first Star Wars movie is a classic example of it that you still ends up working for most people. Harry Potter series is another example where we identify with the Harry Potter character and with all the exceptional children that we all wish we were, and that we all wish we could have gone to a place like Hogwarts. So let's dig a little bit into the fictional works themselves. And this is a tricky one because to some degree it's always, it's like art, you know it when you see it. But what do you think makes some of the stories that start with these cliches classics and great, and others just make you wring your hands and throw the book to the other side of the room? Daniel?
I don't want to cop out. I think it's, you know, tropes are like chords. They can be played well or they can be played badly. I know we all keep saying that. I'm trying to think of a work that uses a cliched opening that I don't like, but if I don't like a book, I'm probably going to set it down and not finish it and eject it from my memory. Can I have a second on this one? I'm struggling with an answer to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Melissa, would you like to go?
Hey, I can understand why you're struggling with answering that one. That's a tough question. And I hate to say it because then others are going to be like, well, what do you mean? But sometimes it's the writing style or the personality that the writer is putting into the characters and how they're handling it, or what they're focusing on or not focusing on, really makes, I think, an impact on how I like the character or the story, whether it is a trope or a cliche or anything that's already been read. The author's style is a huge impact on it.
Beth?
Yeah, I'm going to second that. And I think that the idea that Melissa just sort of touched on of how much they focus on the trope opening. I'm happy to read the trope opening as long as it goes somewhere interesting pretty quickly. If it hangs out there and is just, you know, okay, we're going to do the same thing we've always done, then it really depends again on the quality. I'm thinking about the series, the name of which has escaped me, the Dennis McKiernan, Lord of the Rings, loosely veiled pastiche, in which like the orcs are called the Arcs or something like that. I mean, it's that obvious. But it's, you know, it was amusing at the time because it took the trope and it like, okay, this is familiar. I can put this shirt on because it's comfortable. But it wasn't fantastic writing. The times when it's fantastic writing are the ones, like clearly I can't even come up with the name of the book. The ones that are fantastic writing are the ones that stick with you, but the ones that haven't been ejected from the, you know, rapid access memory is, are just, you know, either not handled well or they hang too much on the trope and not enough on the originality of the rest of the story.
Batya?
I'm going to agree with Melissa and Beth here. Again, it's very much is the writing style good, or if we're talking about a movie, is the cinematography? Is that what I mean? Am I invested for other reasons? Is there craft in the storytelling that catches my attention, or again, personality? Do I like this character, or whether or not I like them, do I have a feeling I want to root for them? I saw someone in the chat mentioned Thomas Covenant, and I put that book down in college, after the second chapter because I despised the character. I realized I didn't care what happened to him at all. There was nothing there for me to want to happen. I did not care at all. I was like, and so which was unheard of for me at the time, I returned the book to the library unfinished. These days I will do that a lot more often than I used to. I'm not a completist anymore. But yeah, you need something to make you want to know what happens next, or to enjoy the ride, whether or not you're in any doubt about what happens next. So those two things I think will really do it. The skill of the storyteller and and is there a character, not necessarily the protagonist, is there anybody there that you want to root for? We'll do it no matter how many times you've seen this story play out. Do you want to see it play out again for this person or for this setting? Sometimes the setting itself is fascinating enough that you don't necessarily have to be invested in the characters, or at least not immediately. An example of that for me was the ancillary books by Anne Leckie. I came to care about the protagonist tremendously, but what initially held my attention was this setting is weird and unusual and I want to find out what's going on in it.
Dan, do you want to take another shot since you had asked for a minute?
I guess one thing I'm finding myself thinking about now is, okay, if we're starting in a trope, maybe give me a character that's aware of it a little bit, that is a little bit genre savvy and is thinking, you know, I've read this story, I've heard this song, I know how this ends, I'm not going to let that happen to me. And maybe they're invested in trying to escape. I can't think of a story right now that does this. Maybe they're invested in trying to escape the trope, and it just keeps chasing them, right? They keep getting caught up in it despite their best efforts not to, because they know they don't want to deal with it.
Hamlet.
Well, yeah, okay, I'll give you that.
I was gonna say, I would read that if you felt like writing it.
Yeah, I kind of like the style in which you just said that, so write that.
Yeah, I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, I think that the heart of it is that there is no one aspect of fiction that you are likely to see differently. It's, you know, it's the singer, not the song. It's the chef, not just the ingredients. It's how you put them together, how well you cook them, what is unique, what you bring to it. And the more of ourselves that we bring to it, the better the end result's likely to be. And the more we just crib together a bunch of cliches, the worse it's going to be. It's very much about the implementation, not just any description of it. So one of the panel descriptions talks about the journeys that we want our characters to have. I've seen a couple people in the chat window talking about the stories they'd like to hear. For each of our panelists, what alternative journeys would you like to see in fiction, whether your fiction or the works of others? You know, what are you not seeing that you wish you would see? Dan?
What I keep trying to do in my own novels is not so much a different journey. I think the journeys are often standard. You know, the protagonist of my fantasy trilogy is a disgraced knight who becomes a paladin. The protagonist of my private detective series is a private detective who lives on a houseboat and, you know, drinks a lot of whiskey and doesn't like people very much. But internality, I want to see the journey internally, and I want to see it affect the characters, and I want to see them think about what they're doing. Especially when I'm writing fantasy or writing a PI genre, there's going to be violence, right? Those are inescapable parts of, those are not inescapable, but if your main character is a knight in a world where knights are professional soldiers, he's going to do violence. I want him to think about the violence he does. I want him to be thoughtful about that and to be understanding why violence has given him the power he has and how he can try and change that, what he can do about that. You know, so that's what I try to do in the Paladin trilogy. In the Jack Dixon novels, Jack, the PI, he won't carry a gun unless he is absolutely forced to by his boss. Unless his boss says, you carry this gun or you're fired, he won't do it. He leaves it in his car. He won't have one on his boat. So I'm not as worried about where the journey is going, you know, on the story level. Is I really am interested in the internality of the character and the way the journey affects them. That might be sidestepping the question, but that's my answer.
Melissa?
I agree with Dan, but also as much with the journeys, I think authors are doing pretty well with trying to add their own style and everything into it. One thing that I would really like to see more, and I'm starting to see more, is one, diversity of the characters, and two, awareness. I really get tired of reading of characters that are completely oblivious to the most obvious hints in front of them. So those are things that I would like to see more of.
All right, Beth?
I wanted to actually ask Melissa a question, which is, do you mean like avoiding things like, oh, look, I'm going to go down in the basement in my nightie with this flashlight that doesn't work? Like that kind of obvious?
Well, that is something. It's like, okay, can you use your head? Because there's got to be something better we can do with this. But also just, and I understand in fantasy a lot of times there is, we set people in certain roles, and that's just the way it is. But women are not always stupid. Women are not always the ones that are in that house over there waiting for somebody to come. You know, they can be played in those roles, but they're smarter than what they're given credit for. Even our characters, sometimes they just miss the major hint that, oh, this person's really not a good person. You know, as a reader, we're picking up, that's a bad person. You know, you want to go, are you not seeing what I'm seeing as I'm looking through your eyes? You know, those types of things, they need to be a little more aware. And it kind of, I think, takes the book next to another level then, when they are aware.
No, that makes sense. For me, I think I want to see more community. Characters, so sort of the opposite of the orphan trope is, you know, families, people in family and situations, whether it's traditional family or not, but people who are in family environments and people who are in community environments who are not necessarily superhuman or super magical or super whatever, but they're just, you know, in the wrong place at the wrong time and have to cope. Because I think that for me, like the phrase competence porn is one that I, you know, worry about using sometimes, but I like watching competent people being competent, and normal people can be just as competent as superheroes and paladins and whoever else. So I think also to Mark's point about the, you know, exceptional children we always wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
Batya.
A journey that I always really enjoy seeing, and I don't feel like there's necessarily a lack of it currently, but just I always want more of it. I am never ever satisfied. Even when I have just been satisfied, I would like more of this. Yes, please. A journey I'm always a sucker for is working past culture clash. Is people who come from settings that have seemingly incompatible worldviews or mutually incomprehensible worldviews, figuring out a way, even just a little bit, to understand each other's mindsets in their own terms, whether that's an individual figuring out how to deal with another individual, whether it's a group figuring out how to deal with another group, whether it's sometimes an individual who finds themselves subsumed in a group where they are an incomprehensible alien and everyone around them is to them incomprehensible aliens, finding some means of comprehension without, and this is important, without essentially losing their own worldview and entirely taking on the other one. I don't want to read assimilation stories. I want to read mutual comprehension stories, each culture finding something to understand and possibly to value in the other one without becoming it. Never get tired of that. No matter how many times I see it done, no matter how many times I see it done well.
Yeah, I think that the genre is getting more inclusive. We're doing a better job of having a broader range of characters and having a broader range of types of people go on journeys. I am particularly personally fascinated with and write a lot about what these adventures cost people. I get very upset when I read a book in which somebody kills someone else or has a physical fight with them and then it's like nothing happened. It has no cost with them. That says to me that the writer has never experienced violence and that they don't understand the real cost of those things. It's, to me, exploring what life really costs people is a great source of tension. We do have a few questions, so I wanted to try and switch to them since we're, I think, about 15 minutes from the end. James Thomas asked, and I'll just give the panelists all a shot at this. Do good openings, in quotes, always have an implicit mystery, in quotes, that you have to read on to find out about? Daniel?
Maybe not. I would substitute conflict for mystery, right? There has to be a conflict there. And if there isn't, and I think several people on the panel said this earlier, if there isn't a conflict, if everything seems hunky-dory at the start, I, as a reader, am waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? I am waiting for everything to fall apart and go terribly. So I think a good opening has some kind of tension or an implicit conflict that I'm going to follow to see.
Melissa?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a mystery, as in that's what you're writing mystery. I would say more as you're dropping enough hints that there is something going on here, and you want to hook your reader to keep reading to find out what that is. It's not that you're writing a mystery story, but you've got mystery to your characters that you're going to lead to, or mystery to the world that you've created that you're going to share with us in some fashion.
Beth.
Yeah, that there's something hidden, whether it's a mystery or some conflict or something about the character or something about the environment. There needs to be some teaser that's drawing you in, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a mystery, I think. But there needs to be some hint that, you know, you should keep reading.
Batya.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. Mystery is one of many possible hooks, and it's usually a pretty reliable one to catch the reader's curiosity, to hand them a puzzle and say, don't you want to see how this works out? It's not at all the only possible way. There's, as has been mentioned, there's conflict. There could be just, oh, I like this character immediately and want to hang out with them some more, which isn't a conflict necessarily even. It's not a puzzle, it's just an appeal. Or, oh, this setting looks delightful and I want to hang out in it some more, is another possibility besides, oh, this setting is fascinating and intriguing and I don't get it, but I want to, which is closer to a mystery. You can have more than one, but you gotta have something. Mystery is one possibility. It's far from the only one.
Yeah, I think as James pointed out in the Q&A window, in the broadest sense of the term mystery, meaning just something we don't understand, I think everything ends up being that way. But if we aren't intrigued in some way, if there aren't things that make us ask, huh, or what is that, then obviously we stop reading because the character hasn't intrigued us, the situation hasn't. And so I think our job as writers is to make sure that we hook you enough to keep you wanting to turn the page. Ultimately, we want you to go all the way to the end. Melissa Mead had the question that I'll throw to the whole panel, again, one at a time. What's the most interesting twist on a familiar trope that you've seen? Dan?
I mean, I hate to reach this far back, but I'm going to say Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. I mean, we all take that for granted now that Luke was an orphan, right? And his father was betrayed and murdered, and he wants to follow his father's footsteps, and he's being held back by his family. And it turns out that the antagonist is actually his father. He's not an orphan, right? And it becomes not a story of following in the father's footsteps and avenging him, but it becomes about redeeming him. And I feel like that story is so ingrained, we maybe even don't realize that it's a trope, or that it's an inversion of a trope.
Twist,
in some way. It's a twist. So,
Melissa.
I was just trying to look back through some books to try to remember what my favorite twist was, and I always get stumped when I get asked that, because it's one of those things at the same time, like, I've read books and I love the twists that they put in, but I don't want to tell anybody what the twist is because I want you to read the book. So I never write that down because I don't want to give it away. Not that I don't want other people to write it, it's just, it's a great book. You should read it to get the twist. But I'm drawing a major blank at the moment.
Oh, no problem. Beth?
I'm right there with you on the major blank, although one of the ones I was thinking about was Crag Keep by Andre Norton. And I know I'm going back into the Wayback Machine, but that's where all the deep storage files are. Which is actually a D&D story, and they're sort of self-aware of being a D&D story. Trying to think of some other good ones. I'll put my thinking cap on while Batya answers.
Batya.
I just pulled this one off my shelf to get the author's name right. Megan Whalen Turner and the Queen's Thief series. By the second book, the biggest twist is revealed at the end of the first book, and I am not going to tell anybody what it is because it completely changes how you perceive the entirety of the book. but the archetype that you think that the character is, they're not. They really look like it, and it's told in first person. It's told in first person, and you still believe throughout the whole thing that you are looking at one particular kind of archetype in the protagonist, when you are not at all. You are looking at something entirely else. There is, I believe, a twist in every. This is the first book is called The Thief, Megan Whalen Turner. The series is sometimes referred to as the Queen's Thief series. As someone pointed out in chat, read them in order. Yes. Every book has got a twist. By the fifth book, I was getting sufficiently used to the author's style that I did guess what the twist was, sort of. But this author is exceedingly good at giving you tropes that you're pretty sure you know what's going on, and then it turns out something entirely else was going on, without her at any point actually lying to you, which means that these books very, 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 very much reward rereading. Conversations that you hear a conversation, you read a conversation in one of the books, and you're like, okay, yeah, I know what they're talking about. When you read it the second time, oh, now you actually know what they're talking about, and it still makes perfect sense. It's like you get 2 books for the price of 1. So yeah, in the same way, I don't want to give away what the twist is in any of them, but very, very good twists on familiar tropes.
Yeah, I would plug here the Ben Aronovich Rivers of London series. It's not that there's any one twist, it's just that the combination of things, he takes police procedural, he adds magic, and you've seen that before, but then he adds a really interesting diverse cast. He turns rivers into people, sort of, and London is an extraordinary character presence and the architecture of it. In the chat window, it's the Rivers of London series by Ben Aronovich. I'll type it in here. But we have a question from Sylvan Oppenheimer. Isn't there a problem when the main character is only concerned with 1 or 2 deaths when sentient beings are being slaughtered in large numbers? I found that a problem with the 2nd season of Stranger Things. A problem with plenty of books and movies. Don't you agree that needs to be avoided rather than used to up the ante? Daniel, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think any character that sort of shrugs off the cost of death and violence is a problem. To some extent, it depends, I guess, on the genre and the style, but I think it's also sometimes the limitations of the format. You're gonna see, in a TV show, you're probably more likely to see characters mourning for other named characters, right? Because that's who the audience knows and is going to mourn. But I think if you're in a book and you have the opportunity to explore that character's interiority a little bit more, you definitely have to be aware that they're not just shrugging off costs of things, and they're not just, mourning the death of their horse while trotting over the corpses of all the other people who perished on the battlefield.
Melissa?
Yeah, and I know there's been books where our main characters are not actually in the war, fighting the war itself that's happening, that you have to keep in mind that there is war happening in your world that is going to impact your character emotionally, physically, and mentally as they're on their adventure. They're going to come across things, and they have to be aware. If they do cross the battlefield, like Dan said, they need to be aware and say that. I mean, if they're just tromping on dead bodies and just don't have a care in the world that these people are dying for whatever case for the people there, that is a problem. You need to be aware of that to add to your character's growth and dimension for that character.
Beth?
Well, to kind of piggyback off something Melissa just said, I think that it's, at first at least, it's appropriate for somebody to be reacting to the deaths that are nearest to them and not necessarily thinking in the larger picture, and that arc, if it's appropriate for the character and the story you're telling, may be part of their growth. But it may also not be, because really, you know, there's only so much we can sort of handle as humans, and B, the ones that are close to us and intimate to us are the ones that matter more deeply. So if I am caught up in, you know, the life in my village and somebody has died, but there's a war going on over there, I mean, I may care, and when it impacts me directly, I may care more. But initially, I think it is, depending on the story you're telling, entirely appropriate to be sort of focused in and then potentially focusing out as you get more development.
Batya?
Karen Sinnott has just pointed out in chat that there's a difference between knowing that people are dying and actually killing them yourself. And I would take that back to the question and say where the only time I see that as a genuine problem in the sense of either this is bad writing or this character is a terrible, terrible person, is where the protagonist or any character feels bad about killing certain people, but not about killing other people. If you've got a hero who says, no, I cannot possibly kill you, the villain, because that would make me no better than you are, when the hero has just ruthlessly cut his way through a room full of faceless henchmen, you know, that is a case I think of either the character or the writer, or I would say most likely the writer, not thinking this through. That if the character has an objection to killing, they should have an objection to killing no matter who they're killing. If the character has an objection to death in general, which I think probably most people do, it is entirely realistic. And I think it would be unrealistic to do it differently without explaining very carefully how this is possible. It is realistic for a character to feel the loss of people they know, or people who people they know, more deeply than they feel the loss of people they have only ever heard about or only ever seen. It takes a very rare, I think, sort of worldview to mourn complete strangers in the way that you mourn people that you know and or love. There's so much being talked about in chat that I want to comment on, but if I do, I am going to hog all the rest of the time, so I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, we are unfortunately down to about 70 seconds, so I just want to give the panelists very quickly a chance to tell folks where they can reach you and maybe type that into the chat window. So Daniel?
Hi, I'm on Twitter at SoundingLine, on the web, danielm4.com. I'll be in the Discord after this is over. I write the Paladin trilogy and the Jack Dixon mystery novels.
Melissa?
Melissa Hayden. I am content editor at melissalhayden.com. Book reviews and blogging at My World in Words and Pages. You can also find me on Twitter. I will not be in Discord here afterwards, unfortunately. I have some running I need to do, but always feel free to hit me up. I will willingly chat at any time.
Beth?
I'm on Twitter at BT_musings, which I just put in the chat, and I will be on the Discord for a little while.
Batya?
I'm on the Discord, both on the Balticon Discord and at Filkhaven for those of you who are interested in Filk. I'm at Animated American on Tumblr, and I'm at Batyatoon on Archive of Our Own, and I'm about to put that in the chat.
Yeah, I put mine in the chat, markfanname.com. We are out of time. Thank you to my panelists. Thanks to all the folks who stayed with us and all the great comments in the chat window. Alex, I apologize for not getting to your question. I will not be able to make the Discord, but thank you all very much. That is our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks for coming,
you,
guys.
Ryan.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you everyone for attending this panel.